people saying, oh, what are the elected officials doing? What are you doing as part of the neighbors, as someone who lives in the neighborhood, to make sure they don't close the supermarket? Don't wait for somebody else to do it.
Everybody who is alive, who struggles every day, is a politician. What we are not is an elected official until we run for office.
The reality is that COVID only created a microscope on problems that were already big problems in our city.
Welcome to Manhattan Neighborhood Network, El Barrio Firehouse Community Media Center. Today we are pleased to host a civic engagement workshop with two powerful Latinas, former City Councilwoman Margarita Lopez and former City Councilwoman Julissa Ferreras. These two powerful women were in the City Council representing two very important districts in New York City. Margarita Lopez, she's the former city district leader, so she has a long history of being involved in politics and in community engagement. She's an advocate, she's an activist, and she represented the City Council District 2nd in the Lower East Side. If you live in New York, you know the Lower East Side is a historic district in Manhattan. We have a lot of Jewish, Black, Latinos, and I remember when I was a little girl, when I came here 13 years old, we used to go to the Lancia Street specifically.
Yes.
To buy oral clothes for the winter. I always remember that. So Margarita is the first lesbian openly Latina elected to office in the United States. She came to New York City from Puerto Rico in 1978. She also was a commissioner in the New York City Housing Authority for several years. And to today, we look up to Margarita for guidance, and also she's a very wise Latina. Now we have Julissa Ferreras. Julissa Ferreras is the representative of the 21st District of Queens, also another very important district. And when I came here, I live in Corona, Queens. I went to Flushing High School, so I also very familiar with Corona, Queens, Jackson Heights, and all that district there. Julissa was the youngest person, the younger member of the City Council who chaired the Finance Committee. She also was very involved in organizations like NALEO. When I met her, she was very involved. She also was very involved in education of young people in Queens, in Corona, Queens. Also very, very active. She was also the chief of staff in the City Council. So before she got elected to the City Council, she was very familiar how the City Council functions. And today, what we would like for you to know is, once you get elected, what to do in the City Council. So we're gonna start by bringing Councilwoman Margarita Lopez to talk a little bit about three questions that she feels are very important for all of us to answer. I don't know if it's, Julissa would like to say hello. Julissa is virtual. And
yes,
Margarita
has us virtual, so thank you for this opportunity, Zenaida. Great to see you, Margarita, and everyone.
I think it's, we're making history, believe it or not, in El Barrio, because 2021 is going to be a crucial year, not only for New York City and New York State, but also for the United States as a whole. So we would like to bring Margarita to start us off.
Okay. I would like to begin my presentation by relating to you a story that had to do with me. I was not the principal actor of it, and I was in 6th grade in a school in Puerto Rico. At that time, we were in the classroom of Mrs. Baldrich. She was the social work study, and she was making a series of presentations about the history of the world at a given moment in which the planet was going through a horrible time, and that time was Second World War II. At a given moment, she began her presentation, but she had to get out of the room, And in the room was a young member of the class. His last name was Butter. I never forget that last name. And this young man apparently had issues or problems with girls. That year, a new girl came to the class. She was what we call in Puerto Rico at the time, New Yorkers. She's relocated from New York to Puerto Rico. And she speaks Spanish with an accent. She was more developed physically, and it was a wonderful human being. I never forgot her. He decided, when the teacher went out, to punch her in the breast. She fell to the floor in pain, horrible pain. The class that she was giving at the time, the teacher, was about the inclusion of Hitler in the world and the abuses that occurred during that period of time in history. When this incident occurred, I immediately stand up and other girls in the room and took care of Daisy, that was her name. Put her in the chair, she was crying because it was very painful what he did to her. When the class was over, I went out and called all of the other girls of the room, of the classroom that I belonged to. And I told them that we needed to fix Butter because he cannot do this again to another woman, because he needed to be stopped at that moment. And we agreed that we were going to get together at the gate waiting for him when he come out. And we waited for him. And when he came out and all of us surrounded him, he cried and he peed in himself for the fear that he felt of what was coming toward him. That is politics. And I wanted to begin that presentation to you with this because I asked everybody to answer 4 questions. And I want to define first and most what politics is to me. Politics is nothing else than the struggle for power. The struggle for power. No more, no less. And when you engage in politics, you engage in politics because you have to have power to be able to survive. Therefore, when you are alive, you are constantly engaging in a struggle for power because the power that you need to get a cup of coffee requires money if you are on the street and you have to buy it. And for you to have money, you have to struggle working to be able to get that money. Then politics is everything that we do to survive. Eating, taking a shower, having a place to live, having a job, transporting ourselves from one point to another. That is part of politics because politics and life and surviving go together. And sometimes we think that politics is something extremely esoteric. And politics is not esoteric. Politics is simple. It is the right of the human being to be alive and to be able to survive. That's what it is. Now, society has complicated this business of politics and had tried to create a complex issue with that. But we need to begin making it what it was, a very clear, simple thing that humans need to do in order to move forward. And I want to demystify that word, politics, because when we don't demystify that word, we convert that word in something else that is not, in something complex, in something that we cannot achieve. We cannot achieve to be a politician. Well, guess what? Everybody who is alive, who struggles every day, is a politician. What we are not is an elected official until we run for office. But everybody is a politician if you are alive. Then we need to distinguish those 2 things because for reasons that I don't understand, we have to begin to demonize politics. And politics have no business with the devil. No business. No, the devil have no business with politics. Therefore, politics is something that every human being needs to engage on. And we need to engage on because the right to survive depends on the structures that we create to live in society. And those structures that we create to live in society begin with government, where all of us agree to be part of that government, because government is us. It's not somebody else. It's not a building in Washington, D.C. It's us. That's whose government is. And we form government depending in the country that we live. In this country, we create a government for the people, by the people. And that's the government that we have in this country. And it's created to serve us, the people. And in that creation, we invented a system of how you organize the delivery of services of government. And we adopted an ideology in this country. And one of my questions to you was defining ideology, strategy, tactics, and logistics. And we're going to talk about that, but not right now. First, we're going to talk about defining partisan politics. And I want to define that because I personally think that we confuse a lot of the concepts that we need to have clear in order to be able to function appropriately and in order to reclaim the power that belongs to us as members of the society. Then I want to define partisan politics because that's a particular kind of politics. And it's different kind of politics. That's not the only one. But I want to define that one in particular because that's the one that relates to how do you become an elected official. And that one defines that process because society in United States have organized the government in the form of democracy, where people vote for a candidate that they elect to represent a particular group of people in a particular part of the world. Therefore, politics that are partisan in this country, we have become to define it as something that belongs to the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, the Independent Party, the Working Family Party, and the party of my mama, my daddy, and everybody else that come through and create a new party. Therefore, that was a joke, the last part. But the parties in question in this country, you know them well. And the most known ones are the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. But I want to make clear here that it's more than two. There are many more. And that sometime in our listening to CNN and to MSNBC or whatever of the channels that you have around there, you forget to listen to this channel where I'm going to tell you what the real parties are. And it contains all of the other ones that I mentioned to you. It's not just the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. And I invite you to look on this information because it's many parties in this nation that usually we don't talk about it. I mentioned some of them, but I invite you to look into this and research it and learn about it because those are not the only two parties in this country. Now, partisan politics in this city in particular, I'm going to come down to here, is more or less controlled by a two-party system, the Democrats and the Republicans. Lately, we have the incursion of a new party in this city that is called the Working Family Party. I'm not going to entertain my conversation on that party in particular at this moment because for the purpose of time, I'm going to use only the two main parties in question, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Then in this city, those are the two major parties in question. And those two parties have the interest on winning elections to represent different districts with the candidates that they endorse. And the reason they have that interest is because each of them have different ideologies. Therefore, when you was asked to answer the question of what do you think an ideology is, I wanted to ask you that question because I want you to think about that. And I want the people who are listening to me in their homes to think about that also. Because before you decide who to support with your involvement in politics, you should know what is the ideology that they sustain. The ideology can be the following thing. Is a conglomerate of ideas that we have about how we like things to be. And the things that we like the way to be could be that I believe that everybody should have a job, that I believe that everybody should have medical care, that I believe that women are equal to men and that they should not be discriminated in regard of jobs or pay. I believe that public education should exist across the board for everyone. And if I believe those things, with ideology, collect all of those things together, put it in one word called my ideology. I believe in equality. I believe that discrimination is wrong, it's not acceptable. That's part of my ideology. The ideas that I hold to be what govern my behavior and what govern the behavior in the society where I live. That's what is ideology. The parties have ideologies. And when we look at them, we need to figure out if our ideology coincides with the ideology of those two or not. And in the process of finding that out, then we need to decide for who we want to vote. Because the ideology is the key that gives you the information of what is the party that you agree the most. What is the party that represents the interests that you have? What is the party that is going to push the agenda of what you believe should happen in the country where you live? And therefore, the most important item that we need to understand about a particular political party is the ideology. And we need to have that very clearly defined in order for us to decide next step. If I want to run for office, where I run for office. Imagine Margarita Lopez running in the Republican Party. I guess that they will kick me out pretty quickly because I am a radical lesbian feminist. And that ideology doesn't go well with the Republican Party. Therefore, me running for office need to be clear where is it that I'm going to run for office, in what party I'm going to try to get in to run for office. Because if I try to do it in the Republican Party, they will kick me out, like immediately. They will not let me through the door to begin with. Therefore, that is critical for us to figure out where is it that I want to engage in order to achieve this idea that I have of running for office. Let's go back to the 4 things that I mentioned before: ideology, strategy, tactics, and logistics. Those 4 items go together. and you cannot separate one from the other. And it's very important for anybody who would like to run for office to understand those 4 items. A person who runs for office and doesn't have a specific ideology is destined to be a traitor, because he's going to run for office telling people whatever they feel telling them, and as soon as they win the election, they will behave against what they told people they stand for. Therefore, that item is critical to be considered in regard of when you're running for office. Make sure that your belief coincide with the platform in which you're going to be running for office. The second one is a strategy. I decide to run for city council. I decide to run for district leader of the political party. I decide to request be appointed to the community board of my district. I decide to be part of the board that compose the police precinct councils. All of those things are looking to get into a place where you're going to start participating in the civic activities of politics in a society where you live. Then, if I have my ideology, and I am clear that I am a radical feminist lesbian, well, most probably, I'm going to try to be part of organizations that sustain those positions. And most probably, I'm going to try to get, for example, into the community board of the area, because I want the community board of the area to create the conditions that will guarantee the safety and well-being of gay, lesbian, and transgender people in the community where I live, where they are not in danger, where the police provide for them the appropriate kind of services that they're supposed to get, because they most likely than not will be subject to brutality and attacks. Therefore, I will look to try to get in that particular structure. Or, if I had done that already and I went through the community board, I went through the police council, I went through the organization in my neighborhood, and suddenly I said, you know what, I'm going to run for city council now. That's my next step. And when I'm going to run for city council, now the ball game changed. And why I said that it changed? Because on the running for the city council, you will need to put those 4 things in place more than ever. You cannot run for office for the city council without having ideology, a strategy, tactics, and logistics. You cannot do it. You will not succeed. You can try, but you are not going to make it. And I mentioned those 4 ones because those are the ones that will guarantee to you the organization of your race in order for you to run for that position. Because running for that position is not standing in the corner and give a speech. It is not about that. It's about a very defined process that requires a series of steps to be complied with in order for you to achieve being registered as a candidate in that election that you're trying to participate. Therefore, those 4 points are critical because you have to organize your campaign. And a campaign gets organized the same way that a business is organized, a private business, or any organization. It gets organized the same way. These apply to every structure where people get together to achieve a goal. These 4 concepts that I gave you. Therefore, the strategy is about, I decided to run for city council. How do I get from here to the seat that is in the city council? I have to construct a strategy of how I'm going to get there. what is the way in which I'm going to achieve that purpose that I put in place for myself. After you establish what your strategies are going to be, I'm going to give you an example, okay? When I ran for office for the city council, I needed to defeat a man that many of you know, Sheldon Silver, who was put in prison recently for being a crook and a corrupt person during the time that he was in the Assembly of New York City. He was the highest person who represented my district. And he had a problem with me. I didn't have a problem with him, but he had a problem with me. He didn't like me. And when I was going to run for office, he put everything he could against me in order not to be able to achieve the collective well-being that we put together to conquer that position. Well, one of the strategies that we put in place in order to get there, one of the elements of the strategy was to collect our petitions in a way that went unnoticed. And one of the things that we did was collect petitions not in the entrance of the subway, because that was very visual. We decided to collect the petitions in the subway, inside, where people pass the turnstile, and we stopped them and we asked them if they'd be willing to sign the petition. And we did that because we wanted to fly without people knowing where we were collecting petitions. That was part of the strategy. That's an example. Another strategy was that we put in place the building of who this person who's going to run for office was. And we needed to put a resume. We needed to put in place the projection of who this candidate is, for what this candidate stands off, for what purpose, what this candidate wants, what this candidate is going to do to represent the people. Then the strategy includes that explanation. And then I want to go now to tactics, because the tactics then and the strategies more or less go together. Because in the tactics, you're going to define what are the methods that you're going to use to get there, to that point that you want to get, right? Then, if I want to get there, I need to register the people who never have voted in the district, because those people were not part of the machine that have been participating all along in the process of democracy. And we decided that we were going to target everybody who lived in the Lower East Side that had been disenfranchised, always, because they were not being welcomed to vote. It was not that they didn't vote it was that nobody asked them to vote. And sometimes we confuse those two things. And we try to imply that low-income people and the working class don't care to participate in politics, but that's the people who participate in politics the most, because that's the people that struggle for the wealth of this country. That's the people. And remember, I told you that politics is the struggle to be alive, the struggle to get power, to be able to accomplish what we need to accomplish. Therefore, if they don't vote, it's not because they don't want to, it's not because they don't care, it's because the disenfranchisement, the repeating the story that these people don't know nothing, that these people don't understand, that these people don't care. That story has been repeated so many times that we come to believe it. And when I run for office, we challenged that concept, and our tactics was to register as many of them was possible. And we did. We used that tactic to be able to win, and many other tactics. that were necessary to win. We created a committee that was going to support us, because in order to run for office, you don't run alone. You have to have a group of people with you, because the business of representing somebody is not the business of one person only. It's the business of many. Then we move now to the last one, which is logistic. In the logistics, it's critical that we understand that if I want to be the city council member, that doesn't happen because my mother wants me to be the city council member. She maybe don't want me to be that, but I did, and then she was happy when I won. But the way that you get there is by putting together these 4 points, and the last point is not less important than the other, the logistic. You see this pen? This pen is more important than running for office. Because if I send my people to collect petitions and I send them with the paper but not the pen, how the hell people are going to sign the petition? And that is logistic. Logistics is about having every single thing that you need ready for people to be able to do the job of mobilizing the masses that you want to mobilize to vote for you, to sign the petition for you. But not only to vote for you, to sign the petition for you, but to keep them then as part of your entourage that is going to be with you in the fight that you're going to take on when the time comes. You call on them because you don't represent a district alone. You are just the shadow of a lot of people that they give you the power for you to speak for them. That's what that is. Then, so far so good? Any question?
Very good.
Very good? Okay, I have A so far. You hear that, boss? Then, moving forward in my agenda, how do you identify a candidate? How that is done? Well, I will tell you that identifying a candidate is directly connected to people that are known in the community, that are part of the civic life of a community. And when somebody comes to a district and said that they want to represent a group of people, and that person had never been seen in the community before, you have to wonder, what is this about? I mean, from where this person come? But at the same time, in the community where you live, is somebody that you have seen them busting their behind for issues that had nothing to do with their personal interest, but they have been there. As I remember when I was in my community, working the issues that affected my community at the time when I was an activist, what people call an activist. I remember working on things that had nothing to do with me. I had no children, but I worked in the election and changes that occurred on the community boards for the school system to create a better school system for the children of my community. I never have a child, but I busted myself working on that. And the first recognition that I received for the work that I had done in the United States was in 1979 with the parents' slate in the Lower East Side. It was a piece of paper that they gave me. I still have it. I'm very proud of it. I think that's the best and the biggest award I have ever got in my life. Because the education of children is the security of my older years. And the consequences of me helping children to be educated, to be developed, to become doctors, nurses, carpenter, electrician, whatever they want to become, is the safety of the older people when we get to this age. Then, that was my first activity. But after that, it was many more, many more, in which I engaged. AIDS, the rights of gay and lesbian and transgender people, and bisexual, the rights of women, the right of people living in the development when they are not receiving the services that they're supposed to receive, the right of stopping demolitions in a community where they want to kick us out, the right of tenant to have services in the apartment, working with the homeless population because they didn't have a place to live, and we needed to create a place to live. I have worked in so many things that you have no idea. And all of those things that I work on them because it was my ideology. It was not because I was running for office. It was not because I wanted to be somebody in politics, because I didn't need to be somebody in politics, because I am politics. I am alive, and political things belong to me as a human being. I did those things because I believed that I had to engage in the struggle for power to achieve the things that I believe. And it came to a point in which we needed to run for office, and I was recruited to run for office. In my opinion, those are the best candidates a community can have, in my opinion. It could be that somebody comes from outside that is a wonderful person and win an election and happen to be a wonderful candidate. But in my opinion, it's very important to know before that person gets elected, who are they made for? What their ideas are. And the only way that you know that is on the practice. Is seeing people participating and working with people in the community where you identify that. Then that's the way to identify a candidate. When we identify a candidate, what we're looking for is not that somebody tell us who they are. It's that we want to know the history of that person, and not through the mouth, but through the actions. And what have been the contribution of that individual that is being identified as a candidate in the community where we're trying to elect the best possible council member. Then that identification is critical in order to begin creating a real support for that person who's going to be representing the community for 4 consecutive years in the first term that they be in office. Then the second point is the history of the candidate and the trajectory that that candidate had. That tells us a lot. And it's important to know that because that would allow us to know the positions that that person has assumed over the time and period in which that person had lived in the neighborhood. It also tells us about their reputation in regard of fulfilling the responsibility. During the time that I was in the council, it was 17 council members that were the heart of that council. And the council was composed by 50 people. Then those 17 council members, in my opinion, I'm not including myself, I'm going to leave myself out. I was a member of it, but I am, I'm not going to accolade myself. But I will accolade those people. They were tremendous. And I have the fortune to serve with them. Then we need to look at the history, because all of those people that I'm talking to you about, they have a history in every community from where they came. And they have a trajectory. They were consistent in that trajectory. Today, they supported the affordable housing concept, and they afforded it all through their life. It was not a fashion statement. It was a statement of who they were. It was a statement about their ideology. Then the third one is professional qualification. What are the professional qualifications that that person has? And believe me that when I say this, I'm not talking about being a lawyer, being a person that went to college. I can have the best organizer without no formal education, the same way that I can have one with tremendous education, because both of them can be good. If they are smart, if they have a trajectory, if they have an ideology, and if they are committed to the neighborhood where they live. But we need to find out that information. What are the preparation that this person had? Because those preparations are not just qualification from college, it's also the life that that person have in participating in organizing the community. And that is part of the qualifications that we're looking for. The last one, elements of identity. That is very important for me. And it's very important because I am of the belief that we need to know who the person that we're putting in place is. We need to know that because we should be very clear to all of ourselves. We should never vote for somebody because it's black, because it's white, because it's brown, because it's Latino, because it's Asian. That's not a reason to vote for somebody.
Because it's Dominican or Puerto Rican.
Yeah, or somebody who's Puerto Rican. That's not a reason to vote for somebody. The same is not a reason to vote for somebody because it's a woman, because it's a man, because it's a lesbian, because it's transgender, because it's fluid, because whatever. That's not a reason to vote for someone either. It's not a reason to vote for someone who is beautiful, who is not beautiful, who is disabled, who is not disabled. Those are qualities that identify somebody. Just identify them. In that identity, that will tell us something about that person. But it's just information that we will get. And the important things of that is that we don't vote for somebody for those reasons, but we also don't vote against them for those reasons. Right. And that's very important. I don't vote for somebody because it's a woman, but I am not going to stop a woman from winning an election because it's a woman. Because those characteristics, being a woman, be Latino, add to the quality that that person can bring to the table. What's happening in Congress and what's happening in the Senate in these days is because too many men are sitting not knowing what peace, negotiation, and democracy is about. And it's time for us to begin understanding that the diversity of people governing a country that is composed by so many people must be reflected in that house. That's all. Thank you.
As you can see how passionate Margarita is, as she mentioned, every so often, they try to change the name of the game. One of those political parties that she mentioned is one that now is everybody talking about. How many people know what was the party that supported Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? The Democratic Socialists of America. The Democratic Socialists of America. And when Margarita ran, the Democratic Party did not support Margarita.
At all.
The Working Party did not support Margarita either. So now, and I remember when I came here in the 60s, in the early 70s, we had the school board. That was the first step for people to run for office. Anyone who ran for the school board, that was a great training because you had to collect petition, you had to, that was the school. So they took it away from us. They took it away from the people because you only needed to have one child in a school, whether you were documented or not, in order to be part of the school board. We used to have the board of estimate. So all the city council members plus the 5 borough president and the mayor used to sit in the borough estimate and vote for everything. I was a tenant organizer. We used to bring buses of tenants, to testify because in the early 80s, late 70s, Ed Cash, who everybody talks, about Ed Cash, he wanted to sell, I would say, most of the city-owned buildings to developers, especially in Midtown, where I live in Hell's Kitchen.
And
So
Lower East Side.
in the Lower East Side.
Everywhere.
So all those working class people were going to be homeless. Where were they going to be put? So we used to say, we are moving to 13th Avenue because we have 11th Avenue, we have 12th Avenue, which is a highway. So where are we going to live? In the Hudson River, because they're going to sell all the buildings that we can afford. People who are working class. Most of the people in Hell's Kitchen, they work in the theater, they work in the restaurant, so they're working. And that's important. So now they come with something new. Ranked choice voting. So we're going to put a little video so you understand how that works, because for the first time in 2021, people are going to have to rank the candidates.
So what is ranked choice voting? In most parts of the United States, voters select a single candidate for each position on their ballot, and the candidate with the most votes wins. This is known as single-choice winner-take-all, which can sometimes result in the election of a candidate who earned only a small percentage of the vote, even when the majority of voters supported other candidates. But that's not the only way of electing our leaders. Ranked choice voting is another voting method which allows voters to rank their candidates in order of preference. In a ranked choice voting election, a candidate needs to earn more than half of the votes to win. All first choices are counted, and if a candidate has a majority, then they win, just like any other election. If not, the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated, and voters who picked that candidate as number one will have their votes count for their next choice. This process continues until a candidate earns a majority and is declared the winner. Let's look at an example. Here, you select orange as your first choice candidate, yellow as your second, pink as your third, and green as your final choice. The first choices are counted. Yellow earned 35%, orange 21%, pink earned 28%, and green earned 16% of the vote. Because nobody won more than 50%, the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated, and voters who picked him as their first choice have their ballots count for their second choice. This continues until a candidate receives more than half of the votes, or 50% plus 1. So what are some of the benefits of ranked choice voting? Ranked choice voting provides more choices, allowing more than two candidates to compete without fear of splitting the vote among like-minded individuals. Sometimes voters feel pressured to vote for the lesser of two evils. Ranked choice voting allows people to vote for their favorite candidate, not just against the candidates they dislike. With ranked choice voting, we see more positive campaigns and less negative advertising. Candidates are encouraged to reach out to as many voters as possible, including those supporting their opponents. They can build a winning coalition with like-minded candidates to earn voters' second and third choices. It's time to fix our democracy and make our elections work better for everybody. We can do that with ranked choice voting. Visit www.fairvote.org to find out how you can get involved.
Election for member of the City Council will be held on November 22nd, 2021. The primary election will occur on June 22nd, 2021. The primary will be the first to be using this year, the ranked choice voting. So Common Cause is another organization that has a lot of information about ranked choice voting. So how many of you knew that that was going to happen in 2021? One person. So that question was in the ballot in 2019. So if you have 5 candidates, so the person that you want to win, you put number 1. The second best person that you like, you put number 2, or you just put it one number. It's up to you. Well, that's how it's going to be. So I have not seen any education, any information about ranked choice
And it's
voting.
not going to be on the Democratic Party or Republican Party either. It's going to be choice ranking. The identification of the party will not be part of it. The ideology, correct? I'm right?
I believe so.
Then
Yeah.
Do you understand now how important is the issue of ideology? Yeah. If you have a bunch of candidates running and you don't know what is the ideology that they represent, you don't know, because they are not running under any particular line. All of them will be in a number, and you vote for the one that you prefer, without not knowing what these people stand for. What is the relationship that they have with the ideology that I support? Yes?
Yep. So that's why it's very, very important that you understand, and you be alert who's running for office,
Question. Sometimes they'll have certain
proposals
that people are not aware until the day of the voting, or even they're not even aware. Sometimes if they're in the back, they don't turn the sheets, they won't know. Under who does that fall, the responsibility of the accountability in letting the citizens know? Does that fall under the politicians, the elected officials that are already incumbent, or does that fall under the media?
From my point of view, any person that have a piece of information that is critical for the well-being of society should be distribute that information, right? But in terms of responsibility allocated based on your job, let's say, the first person that have the responsibility to notify the community is the elected official. And the second group of people who have that responsibility is the community board, that have the responsibility to let the community know these kind of decisions that are made. And I believe that the media also have a responsibility to put information out there for people to learn about these things. I don't think that the media was created to put movies on television. The media was created as the fourth power of a country. And the fourth power is the media because it's independent of the other three, the judicial, the presidency, and the legislature. And that fourth one is more important than the other three because it's the one that let the people know what is happening in their communities. But sadly enough, we don't have too many of these channels. This is one in a million.
Because something like this should be, and then it's happening in June, we're already, middle of January, it should be out there by now.
I agree. And somebody's going to argue that the coronavirus have destroyed the ability of all of us to learn about these things. I don't agree. If we will have a responsible mayor and a responsible city council and a responsible set of elected officials in the entire city, this information should be all over everywhere. Because to give this information, if it's a moment that is perfect for it, it's right now. Because we are in our homes and we are listening to the communication systems. Therefore, the fact that this information has not been disseminated, tell me the fragile that is our political system today in New York City.
People are so focused on the candidates that when they are proposition on the ballots, there are not enough advertisement about proposition. The same thing happened with the judges. I mean, almost in every election, there are judges that we have to elect. And you don't know until you get there. And what happened, most people, they say, oh, there are 3 women running, 1 man. Let's vote for one of the women, or let's vote for the men. They don't know enough about those people they are running. So that is, that is a big problem. So while a lot of changes between now and November 2021, when many races will ultimately be decided, most of the action in heavily Democratic New York City will be the Democratic primary for the June election. Any primary in the Republican Party or any other party will also happen in June. So you have to keep an eye on that. So you're going to have a lot of people. You already know many people that announced they are running for different city council seats. But also the controller, 4 of the 5 borough presidents are going to be in the ballots. The mayor is going to be in the ballots. So this is a very critical year for New York City, in particular New York State. New York City, we don't know what the governor is going to do. He might get a job with Biden, who knows. So there are already hundreds of candidates that have filed to run for various city government seats in 2021, with somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 candidates expected by the time the races really heat up next month. Well, we don't know now with what's going on in DC and what's going to happen January 20, so we don't know. But one thing about the United States is local elections are more important than even the national election. They are critical because, in other countries, everyone go to the president. Here, you go to your city council office, you go to your assemblyman person, you go to your state senator, you go to your congressperson, you go to U.S. senator. That's where you go when you need something. You don't run to Washington, D.C., to the White House to talk to the president. So you go through those channels. And that's why, it's important. Now, in the local level, so how many of you are members of your community board? Very nice. Community was, yes. So that's the first step. Those 50 people decide what happened in your neighborhood. Whether the garbage is going to be picked up, whether the priority is going to be the park or it's going to be filling the hole in the street. Those 50 people are very powerful, very powerful. So even if you don't become member, try to get the mailing list of your community board. That way you know when the meetings are taking place. Each community board has 7, 8 committees. So you can go to your committee, your housing committee meeting, your park committee meeting, your recreation, your education. It's very, very critical. Your tenant association, your black association, your hospital have a board. Every city public hospital have a community board, a board of the members of the community. So when Margarita's telling you that strategy and tactics and ideology and how to choose a candidate. So if that candidate doesn't know any of this stuff that we just mentioned here,
That's not the candidate.
that candidate is prepared to run for the city council? When that candidate has never been to the community board meeting, doesn't know who's in the board of the hospital, sometimes doesn't even know who's living in the block. I remember when I was in college, one of the exercises that was one of the homework was walk in your block and write down everything that you see. And I was in shock because I saw things that were there for 20 years that I'd never seen before. There was 2 organizations in that block. And, and every day I go by there to take the subway. So when they gave me the homework, I said, oh my God. And I wrote housing conservation coordinators, and some other organizations that were there. So we have to be, when you walk in, you look around. And from that day, every time I went to the hospital, to my checkup, to my doctor, the first thing I would do, waiting for my appointment, I would go to the bulletin board. And I found so much information just looking at the bulletin board while I was waiting for my appointment with my doctor, or when I went to take my children to the pediatrician. And we didn't have cell phones, so I would just, something that interested, I would take it with me. It's important. So we're going to talk a little bit about the New York City 2021. There is excitement, hope, and optimism. And the 2021 will bring, but we don't want to wait for change to come to us. We need to be on the front lines of affecting that change. And that's why Manhattan Neighborhood Network, El Barrio Firehouse Community Media Center, have proposed to do this. And I have to tell you, when Councilwoman Margarita Lopez said to me, I would like to do a workshop like we used to do 10, 15 years ago.
Yes.
But now we have the advantage that we have camera, we can videotape it, and the entire world can find out how to run for office. Not just those 60, 70 women that I used to invite for the Dominican Women Caucus or the National Organization for Women. Now this can go on YouTube, this can go on our channel, and everyone can learn. Like she said, we are all in politics. So this is important. So we can all affect change. Why are you aspiring to be a candidate? Don't wait for change, make it happen. It is important. Run for local office, we will show you how. And that's why we are here. That's why Julissa Ferreras is here. That's why Margarita Lopez is here. What issue do you care about? How are you contributing? You'll be surprised. Many of our neighborhoods don't have supermarket. And then when you see the little markets, they are very, very expensive, especially if you have children. So why, and when you hear people saying, oh, what are the elected officials doing? What are you doing as part of the neighbors, as someone who lives in the neighborhood, to make sure they don't close the supermarket? Don't wait for somebody else to do it.
You know, Zenaida, when I arrived to the Lower East Side has 3 supermarkets, one on Avenue D, one in Avenue C, and one in Grand Street. Those 3 supermarkets. And in order for people to buy, and then everybody had to walk a long distance to be able to buy food. Today, after Margarita Lopez and Rosie Mendez were the council members of that particular district, we have 3 supermarkets on Avenue C, 3 supermarkets on Avenue D, 3 supermarkets on 14th Street, 1 supermarket on, I believe, 3rd Avenue. Wow. And that's the work of a community that became organized to destroy the desert of supermarkets that didn't exist in our community for people to have an adequate nutrition and a place to buy where price compete for people to be able to buy food that is good and the price that they can afford.
Exactly.
That's the difference.
And now, everybody talk about fresh food. So you have the green market, and every supermarket is trying to bring more fruit and vegetable because it's important. And this is the little thing that is politics. So 2016, the election in 2016, and the election in 2018, a spark of renewed interest in local politics, because people realize that when you send somebody to Washington, D.C., and that person is not voting the way it benefits the community. When you have somebody voting in Albany, and that person come to the district and tell you something, and then go to Albany and vote with the Republican against what they said in the district, and that happens in our community very often, because we don't keep track how people vote in Washington, in Albany, or the city council. You know, we need to go to those hearings at the city council. We need to know how people vote. That's very important. So now we understand that the politics start from the bottom up. We need to start, you know, that's why you're here, because you care about your community and you wanted to know what to do, how you can encourage other people that you know to run for office. That's important. So individuals and advocacy groups are targeting local and state races as a way to realize the vision of the United States of America. The United States of America. Remember, we all part of the America. So when you hear America, I say, what happened to South America? We Central America. We are part of North America. So
a little part of North America, because Canada is up there.
In Mexico. So when you hear people, oh, America, I say, excuse me, what do you mean? We are all Americans. So the campaign timeline organizes the campaign into 2 phases. preparation and execution. It is important to have a kitchen cabinet to help you design timetable step by step. That little group that go to you and say you should run for office, that's your kitchen cabinet plus your family and everybody else will help you. That's the group that's going to do all that strategy and all that tactics with you and going to help you. And I have to tell you, when I hear people say, oh, you need a lot of money to run, let me tell you, I would say 90% of the political campaign that I have worked with, people don't have millions of dollars, not even thousands of dollars. They have the people. They have the people, and they went to all the churches, all the community groups, and people found out that they were running. Right now, we have the sample of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Okay? She has $600,000, and the person that she was running against had $6 million. And she had less than 1 million, and she won because she in her kitchen cabinet did her homework. She raised the people to vote. She even went to Rikers Island and said, all the people that have not been indicted, you are still eligible to vote. So here, you can mail your ballots. But people don't want to do homework. They don't want to do their homework. They think it's just talking. It's going to happen. You need to know your neighborhood. You need to know your district well. And you need to know the people's needs. You need to know what is it that the people need in your district.
Can I give you an example?
Yes, please.
Danny O'Donnell, the assemblyman in my area, he wasn't what he is now, but he was fighting and we get it. And that's why he's still there as an assemblyman in my district, my area. And he was community board given people 2 or 3 minutes to talk. And always he was saying, we have this thing in the area, the garbage. The police have to go around more than, and all those things make Danny O'Donnell, you know, what he is now, the assemblyman.
Definitely. I had the same experience with Tom Dwayne. I was in a community board with Tom Dwayne. We took over the community board. We decided who was going to be the chair of the steering committee, the housing committee, and then when the opportunities came, we said, Tom, you are the most appropriate person to run for the state assembly and for the Senate. And now we have people like Margarita and Julissa who went through the experience, who can tell us how to navigate the experience, which is critical. It is important. Everything is politics. Everything is politics.
So I called the community board, and they were, oh, we send information. We had a meeting, and everybody agreed. Wait a minute. To who you send information? Because I never received anything. So I mobilized my neighbors mobilized other people. So instead of putting the bicycle on the street to take a space for parking spot, right? They put it on the sidewalk. You see? And then the guy was telling me, the community board, but you know, now you guys can ride bicycle. I said, okay, tell that to an 81 years old lady that needs to go to the supermarket. If she's gonna able to take a bicycle, and if she know how to put the credit card to pay for the bicycle to go to the supermarket. Mm-hmm. Because we know that those bicycles are mostly for blanquitos. We have to be honest about it, right? Because Washington Heights, which is not a bad thing, you know, we are getting a lot of blanquitos in our neighborhood. But we are also now, according to the New York Times, back a couple of months ago, they published that Facebook is going to take over the 34 building, the post office building on 34th Street. Mm-hmm. Facebook. Mm-hmm. So that means that they're going to need bicycles in our neighborhood for those people who are coming from other places to go down to 34th Street. You see? But everything was done behind the community. The people that have been there for many, many years.
Yes.
So that sometimes the community board can be traitors to the communities.
That's why you have to become member of the community board. You know?
correct, but I had to say something. I don't want to disrespect you or offend you in any way, but the bicycles are for everybody. The bicycle.
I love bicycles.
Exactly, but I want to clarify one point. I just want to clarify one point. I know you, and I know that you're a wonderful human being, but I need to clarify this thing. When you make reference to for who those bicycles were, the bicycles are for Latinos, for black, for blancos, for everybody, because it's for exercise. The problem is that the bicycles were introduced to communities in a way that was inappropriate, and forced communities, for example, Washington Heights, that depend a lot of the parkings that are in the street, because a lot of people work with those cars, and they need a parking space to be able to put the car. And then the bicycles were put in a way ignoring the culture of the particular community. And I believe that that was what you were trying to point out, right? Okay, I just wanted to make that clarification, because I don't want that we sound like we have a preference for one race and not the other. And I love every human being, no matter what. And I know that you do, and you do, and you do, and all of us.
No, but Margarita, listen, what, in 103rd and Lexington, there are like 50 bicycles. People don't have credit card in most of the neighborhood, right in el barrio. So you need a credit card in order to take the bicycle.
The majority of the people don't have credit cards.
That's what I'm saying.
The majority.
So then, when I called, they said to me, oh, the people who live in public housing, they only have to pay $5. I say, yes, but there is no way to put the $5 or find the coin. You need still the credit card, and they don't have it. But that was not discussed. Right now that you mentioned Google, they are preparing the city to be just for Google and Facebook.
What?
They are preparing the entire city just to serve them. Yes. Yes.
We all know that those guys receive a big stimulus package. And they don't pay taxes. We know that they don't pay taxes, the taxes that you and I, we pay. And they don't want to fix it because they want all of us to get out. Then they're going to fix it to increase the rent for those people that are coming to work for Google and Facebook.
But then there is your city council member that had to come to assist in organizing the effort of that group of tenants who live in that building. Right. You know, the city council member have that responsibility. Right. And if they relinquish the responsibility, the community had to force them.
Exactly.
Well, I'm just pointing out to that because when I was a council member, Giuliani wanted to empty out my community. And as a result of the fight that we put together, he never was able to empty out our community. And the buildings that he wanted to eliminate and destroy today are co-ops in our community, low-income co-ops, where hundreds of people live, and they're very happy there. But that was because we organized the community, and the community members, together with the council member and the other elected officials, made that happen.
In reference again to the city bikes, I agree with you, and I agree with the lady. Yes, the ideal was that it was to benefit everyone in the community. For younger and older. However, the way it was targeted to a specific generation, which is the modern millennial working generation, whether white, black, or Hispanic. But to impose something that has affected so drastically to the citizens with no warning was detrimental. Because fact is that those bikes are dangerous. They're more dangerous than a car. I've been almost run down more by a bike than by a car, because there's no laws that they follow or law enforcement does not enforce them as they do with cars. And I think that as an elected official, the elected officials should think outside of the box. It's part of critical thinking. And assess as a whole and not just a particular personal agenda.
I agree with you in everything that you said. I don't think that actions like that, of that dimension should be implemented in any community without the total involvement of that community.
And it's happening now with the Metro cards, where they're trying to avoid the Metro card. Half of the people don't have smartphones. So what's going to happen then?
That is something that belongs to the assembly. Just pointing out where that goes.
Anyway, we will continue. So if you're going to launch your campaign for office, you have to have your checklist. You know, you want to complete a checklist with everything you need or think about, or before to launch your campaign, you need to take a walk in your neighborhood, take notes, get involved with your community board, which is important. You have to have a mind map, you know, a diagram visualize, organize the information so that you know, the hierarchy and show the relationship between the pieces, you know, and know who live in your neighborhood, because there has to be a balance, which is okay. You have to know who lives in the neighborhood, what are the businesses in the neighborhood, you know, that's important. Right now, we have a situation, like in this neighborhood, the hairdresser, you know, we have thousands of women, that's what they do. And they have no recourse because they were not organized. And what happened now, some of them cannot receive any help from anyone. And the organization, they have the money that can help them, are helping the people in the little clique. Who you know? In Washington Heights, we have a situation where a Columbia Presbyterian get $20 million to help small businesses. Who managed the $20 million? The Hispanic Federation. How many people in the neighborhood have received any money from the Hispanic Federation? Very few. And what they have received, and I witnessed a lady who she was sent a $250 check.
That's it?
When she has 6 employees, she had to pay rent. I said, you're not going to cash that check. I said, you cannot cash that check, $250 out of 20 millions. So the advocates or small businesses, what are they doing? You know, who do we call right now to help us put this together? You know, Councilwoman Margarita Lopez and Julissa Ferreras, you know, because ends, I know they are available for consultanship, so you need consultant, they are there.
It really is my pleasure to be able to listen to such wise women, Latina women that are trailblazers in many capacities. I was honored to serve as a chief of staff when Margarita Lopez was doing her thing in the council and advocating, and I got really an opportunity to see how it should be done and the right way to done. For it to be done. Zenaida Mendez has been my mentor since I was 16 years old, which is when I was introduced to her. And it turns out that, like most Latino families, you know, she knew my family and she knew my dad and she knew our history. So she was from the neighborhood that I grew up in. So it's been really an honor and a privilege to have her by my side in every step of what we've done. So I think Margarita and Zenaida really hammered in very well on the principles, the values, and the reasoning behind why you should run for office, or why you should support someone for office, right? Because something else that we find is not everybody wants to be an elected official, but there are wonderful roles that you still play within a campaign, an important role that you play, as you know, as Margarita alluded to, even after someone is elected to office, because you need to be supportive of elected officials and make sure that they stay grounded and stay focused on what's important. So I just wanted to talk about, let's visualize that you won your election and that now you're on your way to the city council, you're elected. And what often happens for women, and I just wanted to add something to what Margarita and Zenaida were mentioning, is that on average, a woman has to be asked between 7 and 8 times to run for office before she agrees to. Men wake up and just look at themselves in the mirror and say, I'm going to run for office today. So there's a huge difference and a huge disconnect in how women kind of get involved into, or the process by which we get committed to our communities and to running for office is very different. But let's say, fast forward, congratulations, you are now part of the class of 2021. You are actually would be the class of 2022. And you have been elected and you're going to start your city council path. So I wanted to talk about the content of this presentation, which will be setting up your team or your office, committee assignments and what that means, the budget, drafting, negotiating, and passing legislation, and knowing your leverage, and also your exit plan, which if anybody has followed my career knows the exit plan sometimes is as important as getting into the game. So first thing, I call it the setup. It is really the basis of which so many elected officials, we kind of, in many cases, transition our campaign staff to be part of our team. And in reality, many ways, the way that we bring on our staff, there are different skills. There are skills that you need to be able to run for office, and the abilities that you look for in that type of team might not necessarily be exactly what you need in hiring your staff, the staff that's going to run your office. So I think it's important that people take some time, and this class, the class that will be elected in 2021, will have a little bit more time to be able to transition this, because there will be, and for those that have primaries and really don't have strong Republican opponents, you'll actually have more time than the average elected or council member in the past who has been elected in September. You will be elected in June, so you'll have 6 months of kind of this prep work. But it's really transitioning from campaign mode, from the candidate to the to the leader, to the elected official, and to entering in the governing body. And I think that's really important that the candidate take an opportunity to understand that transition. In my opinion, and all of this is, based on my experience, but the most important person to hire on your team, one would think, is your chief of staff, right? Your chief of staff, and I'm saying this because I was a former chief of staff, you're going to be your right hand. But having had experience of being in government for 17 years, I really believe that looking back, the most important person to hire on your team is your director of constituent services. This is the person who does interface on your behalf with your voters, with your non-voters, with anyone and everybody from the community. So you want someone who's incredibly competent, incredibly passionate about what they're doing, and sensitive to, that represents what your ideology, what your principles and what your values are in the office. I was blessed to have some amazing constituent services people, and I really do believe that it is the quality of what you do in your office that keeps you elected. There's lots of layers of politics, and as Margarita mentioned, there's politics in everything we do. Every relationship, there's politics. In your house, it's political. There's all these different opportunities for you to engage in that. And once you get elected, it does not go away. So definitely looking into your constituent services director, I think is vital for any council member, and honestly at any level. because people remember not necessarily the piece or the flyer that you gave them, but they remember how you make them feel. They remember that when they came to your office and you had a problem, your team made them feel safe, like they were being heard, and that they were going to get a solution, even if it's not a positive one, but at least someone will be addressing them. And I think that's really important. The second thing is the district office versus city hall office, and the differences between that. So obviously your district office is the space that you have in your district. Now your city hall office, I think, for me, was equally as important, because that is where you engage with the people at City Hall that will help you pass either legislation or that you need to meet with for budgetary reasons, or commissioners. And I'm going to come back to, I'm going to talk about commissioners and your City Hall office and leveraging. But one little interesting thing that happened to me was when I first got elected, I came in a special election. So basically everybody had their positions already. Everybody had their offices, and people know that in City Hall, getting a window is like the big thing. If you don't have a window, everybody wants an office with a window. Of course, I didn't get an office with a window. It was Jumani and I, and Debbie Rose, actually, we were all elected in that special election. And what I did is I just went to IKEA and got the biggest, picturesque picture I could find, and I created my own window in the box. So it's about what you do with what you have. So I think that to me is something that I always carried with me, and knowing that our public advocate today was just on the other side of the wall, and I could hear him, he could hear me, and I could hear him during meetings. That's how thin the walls are. So the first 100 days. The first 100 days are something that's incredibly interesting for your process, because one thing that happens, you get sworn in January, and the budget process, and Margarita knows this well, excuse me, the budget process starts almost immediately. The mayor is releasing the, excuse me, excuse me, the mayor is releasing the preliminary budget. You're going to start attending hearings. You're going to want to understand what your priorities are. And this was mentioned throughout the first part of the presentation. Those priorities cost money. There's a cost to a lot of the things, and it's either going to work towards your benefit or against it. So there are people that use money to go against what you want. So that's why you have to be very clear on what your priorities are in those 100 days, and the messages that you want to send from your office. The first 100 days actually puts you right into April. April is when we begin to do the hearings for the executive budget, which is the response to the preliminary budget. That is when we are beginning the second set of hearings on the budget. So the New York City Council budget, and I don't know if anybody knows this in the room or that will be watching this later on, we have by charter have to pass the budget by June 30th. So what happens if the budget doesn't happen by June 30th? Whatever the mayor wants is automatically going to, there's no negotiations. The city council will relinquish basically their rights on the budget. So we don't ever want to be in that situation, and there's an incredible amount of pressure to be able to pass the budget before June 30th. And I always say this was a famous constituent statement that I heard, and I've heard other of my colleagues, also express the same thing. And this is part of that transition between campaign mode and governing. You will hear people tell you, we never see you anymore. And the difference is that because you've been campaigning, some of this is not necessarily relevant, unfortunately, because of COVID, but people will get used to seeing you knock on their door all the time, or be on the train handing out flyers, or engaging in campaign mode. So we have to also kind of make sure that we remain connected to our constituents, that they still see us, that they still see us at the senior centers, that they still, even if it's to talk about earned income tax credit or whatever it is, pick a day, stand on the train, shake hands. Like, we have to continue to remain connected con el pueblo because they're used to seeing us and want to support us in that way. Committee assignments. So the council has 38 standing committees and several subcommittees. And members are generally assigned between 3 and 4 committees on average. One of the things that was interesting in this last class is because there were so few women, some of the women had to actually sit on more council committees because there may be committees where there will actually be no female representation. And that is the crisis of this day and why, we need to elect more women in office, because when I left the council, or this class has 13 out of the 50 plus council seats, 13 of them only are women. And I'm hopeful that this new class will shake that up and change that. Who assigns you to your committee? It's basically very much political. It is the speaker's purview to be able to divvy up the committee assignments. Why do I say this now? I think everyone that's running for office should go on the website and look at the different committees that exist, because you will be asked what committees you want to be on. And we shouldn't leave this to whim. So if something is really important to you and, and it's part of your values and it's part of, your district, then you should be able to request to be and sit on the committee. But as Margarita knows, just because you're not on a committee does not mean that you cannot participate. You can absolutely participate in any hearing and ask questions of any commissioner that you need. We kind of skipped there. And I just wanted to briefly talk about the chairing the committee that nobody wanted. So when I came in the council, as I said, in February, there was a transition of committee seats, and I was told that I would be the chair of women's issues. And it's called Women's Issues, and I think Equality now. So the Women's Issues Committee, people were like, you don't want the committee. It doesn't have a commissioner that you report to, or, it's not a very strong committee. And at that moment I said, you know what, regardless of what committee I get, I'm happy to chair a committee, but also it's what you do with what you have. In that very moment, I understood that in my brain, it went off, well, every issue is a woman's issue. So I would go to my colleagues and say, can we do a joint hearing on various issues that would help lift the committee's attention with either finance or DOE. Like, how is it not a woman's issue to have a hearing with the Department of Education, right? In so many cases, there are so many mothers that really wanted to be able to connect and to have partnered conversations with other committees. So until this day, I was speaking to someone over at the speaker's office, and they said, what people fail to realize is that you cannot think that the Women's Issues Committee had no value in that time, because I took that Women's Issues Committee and turned it into finance chair, right? No other man had that path because there's never been a woman in that seat. So it's always about what you do with it. And if you think about it, people have very strong committees and do nothing with it, or very limited. So the budget. The budget is the most important piece of legislation that is passed yearly in the council. Well, people think that the budget is just something that we negotiate, but it's actually a piece of legislation. And as a council, you have to vote it out. There are very, very stressful, tense moments, because it is also a statement of priorities. And with all the council members that are represented in the council, everyone has very different interests. You will find commonality, but there are opportunities for you to be able to express the stream. I think it's very important that people know the budget calendar, from the preliminary budget all the way to the handshake, and what that means and how that impacts, and all the stops in between. And also, after the handshake, the budget isn't over. After the handshake is when initiatives get assigned. There's a November plan, which usually kind of looks over the budget and its process, and to see if anything that wasn't spent down can be reassigned, or if things need to be funded in the middle of the year. So as a council, I would urge anyone, even if you don't sit on the finance committee, it is in the best interest of your constituents that you understand this process of the budget inside and out. There is a body within the council that's called the budget negotiating team. And they basically have a huge amount of influence on the pace at which, but also the priorities of which the budget will be reflected in the council. Also, there's an opportunity for you to voice your priorities and the importance of your constituents or nonprofit organizations that are important to you through the board delegations and the various caucuses that you will be a part of. When it comes to legislation, I just wanted to focus in on this one. And, I had the pleasure of working with a Latina speaker, and I think it made such a difference. Obviously, she chose me. Melissa Margarita chose me to be her finance chair and be her right hand. So I will be forever grateful to her for that and many other things, and just the symbol that she meant for us in the council. But this piece of legislation here is one that I really just personally drove home. And this is the actual menstrual equity package. And, for many people, menstrual equity, when I started talking about that, they're like, oh my God, you want to be known as the period council member? Who wants to talk about this? You're the budget, you're the finance chair. Why do you want to discuss this? And for me, it was so important for one reason in particular, and that is because it had never been done. It had never been done where someone was advocating for something that was so important to women in any body, anywhere in the globe. So I just wanted to talk about this one so we could talk about the pace of legislation and the fact that legislation can be inspired from anywhere. It can be inspired from your own personal experience, something that really bothers you, something that you'd like to improve, something that people aren't considering. It also often can come from your constituents and all those constituent meetings and those board meetings, community board meetings, school board meetings, precinct council meetings. It could come from testimony in public hearings. When you sit in all those hours of public hearing, you hear something and you're like, yeah, well, why can't we fix that? Or why does that need to be done? It'll come from your friends, because all your friends will call you con todos los problemas from the city of New York. They will call you and let you know that you should fix this. And it can also come from your council colleagues when you work on something together. So the menstrual equity bill actually came to me from a friend who was the general counsel in the city council. And she knew of a woman who was doing some work on getting the tax removed from feminine hygiene products. So when she discussed about just removing the tax, I knew that unfortunately that taxes are not in the purview of the city council. So we do not have jurisdiction on eliminating a tax or increasing a tax. And the reality was that I said, no, well, we have to do more. And this is in the middle of the beginning of our budget process. I said, what can we do? So I told her, give me a week, let me pull some things together. I immediately was able to pull together a focus group of women, of all the women that were coming to ask me for funding, either from food pantries, women in prison, you name it. Every organization, I wanted to do a roundtable. And I put this question to them. And I said, what can we do around menstrual equity? What is the problem that you have? And that's when I heard from women in prison that women in prison had to either buy their feminine hygiene products or it was rationed. Then I had a separate group, and I think this is my organizer head, right? Like elected officials don't do this. This was me as a Beacon director. This was me in my organizing days. I put a group of young girls together and I asked them what their challenges were. And that's when I learned that while public schools provide free product, the access to it was the problem. Sometimes you had to go to the guidance counselor. Sometimes you had to go down in the basement to see the nurse. There was just no reason why young girls needed to be running around all over the building to get something that they need that was as easy as toilet paper. So we were able to pull all this together and package legislation that made sense. And that is why today, young girls have access to feminine hygiene products for free in bathrooms all over New York City. Anyone in a shelter has access to free feminine hygiene products, and at no cost, obviously, but also accessible anywhere. And women in prison have access to feminine hygiene products and no longer have to be rationed out. So I wanted to talk about leverage. Leverage is having the power to compel behavior. And I saw this quote and I thought it was really appropriate, where it says, "You never get what you deserve, only what you have the leverage to negotiate." And at the end of the day, leverage and negotiating abilities are very important in our community, because it is what gives us the opportunity to be able to deliver for our community, is identifying the deliverables. When I did a hearing on street harassment, which had never been done, and most people were like, well, who wants to do a hearing on that? I was able to leverage the experience that some young girls were having, and bringing at the time the chancellor to my district and saying, you need to walk the streets and see what these young girls go through so that you understand. So I was able to use the leverage, and I was not the finance chair when that happened. I was the Women's Issues Committee. But what was the leverage there? The importance that the chancellor, I made it about those young girls and the fact that they were being harassed. And we were able to make real change and effect change for those young girls, but also for many girls in New York City, and providing a safe haven around public schools. Just like drug-free zones, we made them harassment-free zones. There was a great hearing within the Women's Issues Committee on Backpage and sex trafficking, and the fact that Backpage was turning a blind eye to sex trafficking. And if many people know, in my community, for a long time, that was a very big problem. It turns out that little hearing, and if you look it up, that hearing that we had in the city council, and we were in the cafeteria, because I don't know if Margarita remembers, but the city hall was under construction. So they had us have hearings in like the cafeteria, and we couldn't use City Hall for a long time. So this hearing was literally held in a cafeteria room. But because of that little hearing, the federal government was able to shut down Backpage about 4 years later, because they had the audacity to send their attorney to come and justify their behavior as to why they couldn't, why they really are not condoning sex trafficking. Turns out that statement that she made at that public hearing in the city council, in the Women's Issues Committee, that footage was used to be able to shut down Backpage. And right now, Backpage doesn't exist because of that hearing. Willets Point. Thank you. I see the Willets Point. So Willets Point is an area in my district that for many years has been, many administrations have attempted to redevelop it. I went into very arduous, long negotiations over Willets Point. But independent of Willets Point, one thing that I used my leverage for was I understood that project would take a decade plus to see the light of day. I said, if you want me to negotiate on Willets, I want to know what you can build right now. I want to deliver things for my community right now. And right now in 2021, Willets Point is still not developed, but we were able to get 87 units of senior housing that seniors are living in already. We were able to get a child care center at the first floor in the commercial space of that senior housing. So those are the things. It's not always the big picture in your negotiating. It's the things that you can attach, the deliverables that you can have for your community in the immediate and in the now. But you can only do that when you have and when you hold your leverage. So that was one example. Same thing for me. The US Open, when they first started, it was under the Dinkins administration. Mayor Dinkins, rest in peace, loved tennis. So he basically gave them a pretty good deal at Flushing Meadows Corona Park. When it came before me, the U.S. Open wanted 1 acre. It was just 1 acre of land, and they said, if we use the formula that Dinkins used, then it should cost us. And I said, we're not using that formula. We're using Julissa's formula today. And with Julissa's formula, the U.S. Open needs to be open to my community. You need to provide free tickets to my community. You need to have a senior day so that my seniors can participate in tennis programs. You need to reinvest in the community. And we had a whole list of community benefits and agreements. But the one that I really am most honored about was I saw that every large park in every community had a conservancy or a group that dedicated to the improvement of that park, not Flushing Meadows Park. Flushing Meadows Park had, a couple of small community groups, but nothing official, nothing recognized by the city, nothing that had the funding source that it needed. So one of the things that we were able to invest in or identify was that the US Open had to commit to investing millions and millions of dollars into a Flushing Meadows Corona Park Conservancy. And those are the things that we can do with leverage and power. So, I think that oftentimes we don't necessarily know what leverage looks like. And I think that it comes, and I hope you can see the different examples of it really is about how we position ourselves in our negotiations. And if you're a legislator, you are a negotiator because your job is to go in their city hall and come back with deliverables. So you want to make sure that your community understands that you're there fighting for them. And, to wrap up, because I know that this has been a long program and I would love to hear questions. I'm hoping we can figure that out, but the exit. Oftentimes we really focus on getting elected, and I've seen this happen, and I'm sure Margarita and Zenaida have seen this. Elected officials believe that that the seat belongs to them forever. And I think it really is it really is to our detriment when people go into public office not understanding that this is not a job that you should keep forever. And this is my opinion. I think that it's important for all of us to go in with an exit plan. I'm not saying get out of politics, right? That's not what I'm saying. Your exit plan might be to run for higher office. Your exit plan might be to become a commissioner. Your exit plan might be to get completely out of politics. But whatever it is, you shouldn't consider yourself to have such ownership over this position that you have, because then you lose how important and how valuable and how what an honor it is to serve. We are public servants, and we need to be cognizant that having an exit plan and having people understand that you have priorities, that you're going in there to handle your business, and that you are not trying to keep this seat forever. I mean, in the council, we have term limits, so that's not the case. But what I do see now is a lot of assembly members and council members are flipping their seats and back and forth. So I actually left the council. When we talk about leverage, even when I made my decision to leave, I made sure that I wanted to give the exclusive to a reporter that I knew, a reporter that was young, a reporter that was a Latina. And I gave the exclusive of me leaving the council to Gloria Pazmino. And, and I believe that helped her career in many ways. She's a consummate professional, just a lovely woman. But I left because of my family. I left because I was married and my husband was living in another state. So it was time. And as some people know, I then went on to move to Australia, and I lived in Australia for 2 years, and I'm just coming back. So I just implore you that while you're going through your process, you constantly check on yourself and in your gut. Why am I here? Why am I doing this? And what's my exit plan? How am I going to bow out of this gracefully and understand that there's a time limit for me to take care of business and get things done? Again, thank you for this opportunity. I'm so honored to be able to speak with all of you.
You were great as usual. And I have to say that I cried when she decided to leave.
Yes.
But like she said, it's important that you know your priority, because she knew her priority were her son, her husband, her mother. She's an only daughter also. She's, that's a lot on her shoulders. So, and she did an excellent job for 8 years. You know, so you have to know your priority also. You know.
I heard sad when you left, Julissa.
She said she was very sad when you left.
I know.
Rosa
I mean,
Sorondo.
it was one of the sad, hardest decisions. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make in my life. But I also know that the people that love me and know me knew that I did everything con corazón y con coraje, and I dedicated myself. It was 17 years in government. But you know, look, I'm still here. I'm still healthy.
You're still very young. You still can be the first women president of the United States.
Why not? Why
She
not?
was born in the United States. Let's make that clear. She qualified.
She doesn't need to show the birth certificate, right?
You were born in New York City, so she qualified, okay? Thank you, Julissa. Any other question for Julissa or for Margarita?
I have a question, but I don't remember exactly the name of that organization. Safe Horizon, something like that. Yes, because
Safe Horizon.
do you know any here in New York? Because my organization, Dominican Sunday, now Dominican Community Service, we used to have a sign they used to put in the door of organization. And having the sign, one day a police came with one girl. She had her video walking in the street. She's come her period, and he bring me to. And let me tell you, I didn't know the sign was for that. When they came, yes, immediately they explained me, but at the same time, I don't want the police understand that I don't know exactly what it is. And that happened 3 times with 3 different cases. But still I have the sign in my door, but I would like to know if any around here in New York, because the one we have was in 1/3 in Amsterdam, but they no more. They're like 3 years ago they left.
Well, Safe Horizon is definitely around. I'm sure Margarita is from.
It
too.
exists.
It exists. They might have changed their strategy, but what we can do is, Zenaida, why don't we connect, and I can definitely identify the executive director, and maybe there could be a further partnership. But you know, unfortunately, we still are very much in need of Safe Horizon and all of their partners to help.
No, definitely. Yes, they are around. In addition to that program, they house, domestic violence survivor.
Yeah.
They do a lot of work with a lot of women in the city. Definitely.
They have a lot of contracts with the city.
Yeah, they do. They do, which is important, yes. But you see, that initiative that Julissa was there to do was important, because when we find out that so many women in prison, when they get their menstruation, they have difficulty, getting the hygiene that they needed. So that was critical. So something that people say, why are you going to deal with that? So
Because it's a fact of life.
Exactly.
Because you wouldn't be here if your mother wasn't.
Yeah.
But also, one of the things that I really loved about being able to lead this effort is that it set a global wave, right? The minute that I got to Australia, I remember turning on the TV and their legislative body was doing work on it. There was work being done in New Zealand. There's being work done in other states here. So New York City, our piece of legislation really has led the wave and the effort of, one, removing the tax in many jurisdictions, but also people looking at different ways to provide free products.
Definitely.
Toilet paper. Why do the men get to have toilet paper and the women can't have everything they need?
And and this is important, because one of my pet is why there always a legislation to legislate our body.
It doesn't fail.
And then we don't want to talk about it. We have to talk about it. And I said to women, when your candidate comes to talk to you, Do they talk about affordable child care? Do they talk about affordable education? They talk about your pediatrician or the child clinic? Our priority, why is it that we work in all these men campaign and then we don't make our priority to make them make sure that that's their priority?
You know, it's funny that you mentioned that, because one of the things that we also worked on with the Women's Caucus was the fact that this was happening in the Bronx, but now it's happening, I think, across the city, where there are less and less OBGYN in practice. Yep. So in the Bronx, most women would have to go to a hospital because there are very few private practice OBGYNs. Mm-hmm. And if anybody's had a baby, you know, you're literally going in and out of the doctor's office constantly. And now, why is it that a woman in the Bronx doesn't have the same opportunity to have a private practice if she should decide? And it has everything to do with the insurance costs. Mm-hmm. The New York State insurance cost for an OBGYN is so high that most medical doctors are just like, we'll take out the obstetrics and just have GYN, because it was just too expensive to serve women in the Bronx or serve women in Queens, which is really unfortunate. And again, that has everything to do with the legislative body in Albany and, you know, and the different, you know, protections that they need for lawsuits.
Well, these are the issue that we need to know so we can fight for it. And we can, because imagine in our community where women, when they go to the doctor, most of our women, they already have the cancer very advanced, because we take care of everybody and put us last. But also, many don't have insurance, like those hairdressers that I'm talking about. Many of those women working in beauty salon right now, for the year is gone. They haven't been able to go to the doctors because they don't have insurance. They don't have insurance. You know, and that's an issue that we have to, it's a lot that we have learned this year, but we have to make our priority. We have to know what we need as a family, because we used to look at the community, you know, and we look at the entire thing. What is it that we need? Like when Margarita said, I don't have children, but she cares about the children in the community, because they are the future. Besides, without our kids,
we are nobody.
Exactly.
So I want to add that the same is happening with mental health. You know, there are a lot of mental health clinics closing, and even psychiatric hospital closing. So for example, in Kingston, New York, there is a psychiatric hospital that, because the pandemic, the psychiatric hospital was closed to sell the people with the COVID-19.
Oh, wow.
If they admitted 10 people with COVID-19, that was a lot. And still the community is fighting to reopen again the psychiatric hospital for the community. Yep. Even the substance abuse clinic, they closed down the clinic. The South Beach Hospital in Staten Island, I used to send patients over there, who almost closed the hospital to sell the COVID-19. So now we have those patients on the street, no services. No, now everything is through online, through Zoom. They don't have access to Zoom. And I see them walking on the street with no services.
I think, you know, the real unfortunate thing, besides the fact that, you know, many of our family, friends, and neighbors have died, the district that I represented was the epicenter of the first phase of, you know, and my parents actually both, thank God, contracted COVID and are still facing complications from COVID, but are now on the other side and, you know, recovering. But the reality is that COVID only created a microscope on problems that were already big problems in our city. From mental health, right, access. You know, when you went to our prisons, most of the people that were in prison were there with major mental health issues and the lack of having access to mental health. for, to our hospitals, and the fact that our hospitals were already at a maximum capacity. What COVID did is just highlight the issues that we had. And it would be fiscally irresponsible of me not to mention that we're going to be in a very tough fiscal crisis very soon. We're in one now, actually.
No, definitely. So we have learned many lessons, and this is one of the richest cities in the world, imagine. But we have, whoever can take the city to the next, out of the chaos, because right now this is chaos. And that's the reason why we have to pay a lot of attention to people running for office this year. We have to pay a lot of attention, everything that you learned from Margarita and Julissa today, so you know what the strategy, what the tactic, what the logistics, the ideal. And what I tell people, see, there are 10 points, I disagree with 2, but I agree with the 8. I can negotiate the 2 that I disagree.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be the 10 point. But we have to be clear, what are our priorities, Because I have to tell you.
Non-negotiables, right? There are non-negotiables,
Exactly.
but there are negotiables.
Exactly. No, I tell people, when my children were small, I never thought that I'd be fighting for the same thing that I fought 40 years ago, today. So my grandchildren now I have to fight for my granddaughter. It's the same issues. I'm like, wait a minute. I marched for 30 years, women's marches, and now I have to continue marching. What was going on?
Because the struggle for power never stops until you die.
Oh, no.
Well,
Now we know that we can never die.
struggle for a long time, Zenaida.
I understand the part where you say you have to be consistent, but can there be room where you can change your mind or the way or beliefs that you have? And if so, what can you do in order to remain accountable to your community?
Okay. I'm going to answer that question to you with the following thing. I don't know if you know the epic called Don Quixote de la Mancha.
Yes.
That's a novel, an epic, a novel, that was written by Cervantes, Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra, an Spaniard guy. This man was a fighter for justice, fairness, and equality during the time that he lived. For those reasons, he was put in prison. And during the time that he was in prison, he wrote Don Quixote. And that persona that he created that persona in the context of who he was, the ideology that he sustained. And it's one place in the book that he said, busco en la vida la muerte, salud en la enfermedad, en lo cerrado salida y en el traidor lealtad. Those words that I just said are words that talk about the impossible dream. That's what an ideology is. It's the impossible dream that you try to make possible. The possibility of equality in the world, where all of us finally understand that we are sisters and brothers, that we had no right to hurt each other or to take away from each other. That's what ideology is. It's about the ideals that we believe are fundamental to our existence. Our existence as individual and our existence as a society, as a collective. Then your ideology can modify when you find new information, when you get educated, when you try a solution and that solution cannot work. But your ideology never changes. Never. You can change certain things that are related to how you do something. We believe that the planet was here forever and that we can put pollution all over. Now we know better. And we know that industrialization has created this problem because we begin to use fossil fuel. Now we have to back off. The ideology doesn't change about creating jobs for everybody. What has changed is how we're going to continue producing solar panels, wind mills, and we will find a solution, but the ideology continues to be the same one: jobs for everybody. How do we get the job is what changed. Then you can modify positions that you have, but you do not change your ideology. That doesn't change, because that change, then what you sustain and you told people that you are for, you were lying. And that is unacceptable.